The beautiful thing about democracy is our ability to improve the world through proposed ideas. If we see something we don't like, we can propose a solution and give everybody a chance to talk about it and then vote on it. If enough people like it, the policy gets implemented. That's the whole purpose of having the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. They analyze problems, propose solutions, debate the merits of the solution, and vote on whether to implement the solution. The plan proposed by the affirmative team is, of course, the same thing. It's a proposal to fix a problem and make life better. And when people debate the merits of a proposal, they always consider three important factors. First, they consider whether there really is a problem in the current system. If there truly is a problem, then we should consider the proposal. But if there's not really a problem, then maybe the proposal really isn't worth considering. Second, good leaders consider whether the problem is harmful or undesirable. If so, then we should definitely look at the proposed solution. If not, then maybe the problem is acceptable for the time being and no solution is needed. Third and finally, we ask whether the proposed solution actually fixes the undesirable problem. This is pretty important because even if everyone agrees that there is a harmful problem, we must also agree that the proposed solution will fix the problem. These three questions form the basis of our democracy. Is there a problem? Is the problem bad enough to solve? And will the proposed solution work? If the answer to any of these questions is no, we should probably not adopt the proposed solution. That's worth saying a second time because it's the whole basis of policy debate. If the answer to any of these questions is no, we should probably not adopt the proposed solution. Is there a problem? Is the problem bad enough to solve? And will the solution work? In the world of debate, we call these three questions stock issues, and it is the responsibility of the affirmative team to prove that the answer to each of these questions is yes. Thus, the affirmative team has what we call the burden of proof, because they must prove that there is a problem, that the problem is bad enough to solve, and that their proposed plan will work. If the affirmative team can't prove these three things at a minimum, they probably shouldn't win the round. Each of these stock issues has a name: inherency, harms, solvency, and topicality. We'll get to the fourth stock issue, topicality, a little later. Each stock issue is covered in greater depth in a different video, so the purpose of this video is simply as an introduction to teach each of the four stock issues. You can think of stock issues as mini debates, and doing so might make debate so much easier to understand. And as each debater speaks, he or she will carefully navigate through each mini debate by making it clear when he or she is moving on to a different mini debate. So for example, you might hear a debater say, let's start with inherency and spend a minute or two making all the arguments or the responses to the inherency arguments. Then the debater will say something like, let's move on to the harms. And at that point, everyone else in the debate round now knows the debater is moving on to a different point in the debate. By efficiently organizing all the arguments into a debate round into specific categories, it's much easier for everyone to keep track of all the arguments in a debate round. This is a critical skill that you must master in order to be successful in debate. So let's start by using our resolution for this year. Resolved, the United States federal government should substantially curtail its domestic surveillance. We know that the affirmative team gives the first speech, so let's take a look at the first affirmative constructive. The first affirmative constructive is actually organized by each of the stock issues, so it's a good place to start. The first stock issue is inherency, which is a question of whether or not there is a problem stuck in the status quo. Affirmative teams need to prove that there is a problem inherent in the status quo and that the problem is going to continue until it is fixed. If the affirmative team fails to prove that there is a problem, there's not much sense in continuing the debate. As an example, many students oppose school uniforms because they don't believe that there's a problem in the first place. So why discuss the solution if we don't even agree on whether there's a problem? In this year's resolution, affirmative teams will need to prove that the current level of domestic surveillance by the federal government is problematic and needs to be curtailed. And because you'll propose a specific plan, you'll need to define the specific problem. For example, let's look at the National Security Agency's PRISM program, which is a computer network designed to analyze internet traffic to search for illegal activity. The NSA claims that the PRISM program isn't used to spy on domestic internet traffic. But in 2012, an NSA contractor by the name of Edward Snowden leaked evidence that demonstrated that PRISM does access internet traffic within the United States. So perhaps your affirmative plan is to shut down the PRISM program entirely. And in order to do so, you must first prove that the program exists and that it's here to stay until we do something about it. You can do this with evidence from a variety of published sources, like articles and reports available on the internet. Now, if you can't prove that the PRISM program is a problem, or you can't prove that the PRISM program is going to be a problem in the future unless we do something about it, then you can't prove that the problem is inherent. And if you can't prove inherency, you probably won't win the round. Let's move on to our second stock issue, harms. Harms is a debate about whether the problem is harmful. This is especially important because even though lots of people might argue that government spying is a problem, it might be more difficult to prove that the problem is harmful. Let's take another look at that PRISM program. Even if it's true that PRISM spies on Americans and captures our email, internet search history, or text messages, that doesn't automatically mean that we are harmed as a result. Consequently, the affirmative team will want to find evidence to demonstrate how having their private information accessed and analyzed by the government harms Americans. This could include violations of search and seizure laws or violations of our civil liberties. Now, if you can't prove that the PRISM program is harmful, then you probably won't win the round because you didn't win the harms stock issue. This brings us to the part of the first affirmative constructive where the affirmative proposes a plan. The plan isn't a stock issue, but since we are organizing our discussion of stock issues around the organization of the affirmative plan, we should point out that this is where the affirmative team will give the details of their plan. So let's say that the affirmative team proposes that the federal government bans the use of the PRISM network. This brings us to the next stock issue, solvency. Solvency, as you might guess, is the part of the debate that focuses on whether or not the affirmative plan will solve the problem. Maybe the problem really does exist, but if the affirmative plan doesn't solve the problem, then why would the judge vote for the affirmative plan? So our solvency arguments for our debate might present some evidence that says that eliminating the PRISM program will restore our constitutional rights and our civil liberties. At this point, the affirmative team will move on to read one or more advantages to their affirmative case. Advantages aren't really stock issues, so we'll shift gears a bit and talk about our last stock issue, topicality. Topicality is the portion of the debate focused on whether the affirmative plan fits within the resolution. You see, the affirmative plan must do what the resolution says it must do. This means that the affirmative plan cannot increase its domestic surveillance, nor could it curtail international surveillance. You see, it must do exactly what the resolution says it must do. Topicality is much different than the other stock issues of inherency, harms, and solvency for a few reasons. First, the affirmative team does not need to prove that they are topical in the 1AC in the same way that they need to prove that a problem exists. The problem is harmful and that the plan solves a problem. Therefore, affirmative teams won't even mention topicality in the 1AC. In fact, they're hoping that the negative team never mentions topicality either, since topicality arguments are only introduced in the round when the negative team believes that the proposed plan violates one or more words in the resolution. It is the job of the negative team to introduce topicality as an argument. But if and when the negative team introduces topicality, the affirmative team still has the burden of proof to prove that their plan is in fact topical. So, those are the stock issues: inherency, harms, solvency, and topicality. They aren't the only arguments you'll have in a debate round, but they will be part of every round because the affirmative team must prove all four to be true in order to meet its burden of proof. Before we finish, there's one last term that we need to cover, and it's called prima facie. Prima facie is a Latin term that means at first glance. This means that the affirmative case must absolutely present an inherency argument, harms argument, solvency argument, and a topical plan, and that they must do this in the first affirmative constructive. If any of these are missing, the affirmative case doesn't meet its prima facie burden. The term isn't used that often, and really only applies if the affirmative fails to present one of those major arguments in the first speech. But since every team does, then it's rarely an issue. And the prima facie burden has nothing to do with whether you win the argument, only whether you present the argument in the 1AC. So if a negative team ever claims you didn't meet your prima facie burden, then either you forgot to read part of your affirmative case, or they forgot to learn what the term actually means. So that's a lot for now. Scrub the video back and review any portion you didn't quite understand, and make sure you can discuss, debate, and defend the following terms: stock issue, burden of proof, prima facie, inherency, solvency, harms, topicality. Okay, that's all for now. Remember that the affirmative team needs to win every stock issue or they haven't met their burden of proof. That's all for now. Good luck, debaters.